On this day, change is here. The Levine Group and Knight and Bond have walked the longest of walks. So our generation and those that follow can run. So,
thank you. So, we're going to get a focus on that. Wonderful. So, some of you in this room know who I am, some of you don't, and we're going to get to know each other over the course of the next 10 to 15 minutes. So I'll say there are three things that characterise the Levyne Group. The first one being the engineering mind, the second thing being relentlessness, and the third one being fluidity of thinking. Now, to give you guys the opportunity to get to know me and also about the firm, I'm going to give you some personal anecdotes on all three. So, the first one makes sure that what we do actually works. The second makes sure that what we do works well. And the third, well, that makes sure that our company's built to last. So, to discuss how we even developed the engineering mind in the first place, or how I did, so to speak, it started off by having an obsession with taking things apart. When I was younger, if it was a microwave, a computer, a TV, a Hoover, whatever it was, if it was in my reach, remotely interested, mechanical or electrical, it's getting taken apart, right? Whether it was the first electric shock, or whether it was understanding how smaller parts of a system came together to make larger parts of a system, these are things that you sort of remember, and then you're able to reapply to making new things. Whether that was your bed having speakers in the headboard, or if it was building carbon fibre parts, or whether it was developing a Group 2 drone fleet which would set the standard for technologies in its field. Now, I know that sounds pretty much like an RAF advert, but everything that I just said was true. But how this even translates into business, the first thing is asking yourself how a car works is a huge question out the gate. And even the best of engineers, they won't be able to answer that for you, as much as they would like to. Asking yourself how a company works, to me, that's of the same magnitude. Now, when you're looking to increase the performance of a car, you don't look at applying effects to the system as a whole, because it's not going to, you just can't do it, it's impossible, right? But what you do is you single out those components or smaller systems, you make them better, you optimize those, and when you do that enough, when you do that enough, the system as a whole comes together, and then you have overall a generally better performing system. This comes into everything that we do, whether it comes down to business strategy or product itself. It means breaking things down to the core, and on the build side, not being afraid to throw away the instruction manual and explore new outcomes. But, as Knight and Bond will later discuss, having this thought process myself is one thing, but being able to actually systemize it to generate repeatable results, that's the more important thing. Now, having an idea is one thing, selling them at large is another, but having them adopted on a mass or global scale is a completely different ballgame. And that's where relentlessness comes into play. Now, another sort of anecdote for you. I enjoy problem solving, as you guys already know, but I also enjoy being paid. So I thought, if I'm going to do this as, and earn money from it, I'm going to become an engineer. That's the path that I wanted. But I knew for me to get paid as an engineer, I needed to go off and study. So I chose Bicester College for Motorsport in Oxford. I live in London. That's a 2-hour commute door to door. So I needed to figure out a way to pay for this, so I picked up some shifts at a garage. Now, I don't know how much you guys know about working before you're 18, but I was earning about £1.08 an hour. So I was earning absolute peanuts, and I just about made it to and from college without even being able to buy a Lidl croissant. So that was, the story. Now, in the garage, I was a body and paint technician, so when you reverse into a pole and you dent your car, I would fix it. Whether someone hits you from the side, I would also fix that. And then I became a mechanic, so it was things like dropping out engines, changing clutches, changing transmissions. That was my job. Now, heavily underpaid, I thought, okay, I'm going to build carbon fibre parts because I understand how to do it and I know that people want it. So, and also, if I'm using the garage's resources, I actually cut 90% of my costs, so everything I made was basically purely profit, which was good for me, right? And it meant I didn't have to do my job throughout the day anyway, so it was alright. But I earned a lot more money doing that than I did at my normal job. But I found when I'm negotiating with suppliers, when I'm bringing on new customers, when I'm trying to figure out how to earn more profit, I'm putting out fires, I'm solving problems, I'm doing everything that I wanted to do in the first place. So now I have a new path. Because I'm thinking, I'm solving problems still, I'm doing everything I've wanted to do, but now I've realised I'm, not half bad at running a small business, so I wanted to understand more about it. I had that curiosity to understand the business of owning and running a business. So where better than private equity? Right, so the first firm, sorry for the briefness of the slide, here's a story. The first firm I got an interview at, I just turned 18, and it was in raising capital from high net worth individuals and institutional investors and sophisticated investors. So that was held at Gatwick, Sofitel, and I had to drive out there. Again, that was, quite a long distance from London, but I'd gone out to do that interview. Naivety at the time led me to believe it would be a one-on-one interview. It wasn't that simple. When I got there, the lady, she took me upstairs and we'd gone in the lift. Doors opened onto a line of about 80 people that looked just like me, right? Their best black suit, not a hair out of place. But the only difference was I'm seeing people from my age to north of 50. They definitely beat me on experience, they looked confident, they had everything that I didn't have. So I'm faced with a decision. Do I go home and just pretend like I never got the email? Or do I just stay, show them who I could be, and hope to God that they see it? And so I chose option 2. So that's what I did. I just waited, right? Everyone was given a badge. The badge had a number on it. This is how cutthroat it was. Everyone had a number, and there was one instruction. If you hear your number called at any given moment, get your bag, don't speak to anyone, go to the back of the room and leave, because you weren't successful in the process. So, I'm sitting there, and round after round, there was about 6 rounds, I'm hearing numbers being called. I'm seeing people get up, it was like the Hunger Games, right? I'm seeing people get up and leave the room. People that I'd spoken to on the way in. I'm thinking, that was my friend, he's just gone. It was quite sad. But somehow I stayed to the end. And somehow I stayed to the end. And in the last part of it, that's when it got to the one-on-one interview. I shouldn't even say one-on-one because it was 4 company executives sitting opposite you, directly understanding how you deal with stressful situations, how you deal with, how you understand the surrounding economy. They're really picking your brains for all this stuff. Anyway, I was successful in that. Out of 12 people, 8 started on Monday. We had a day's rest and we were straight in Canary Wharf on the Monday. I thought life had changed. It was beautiful. I'd never seen anything like it, right? We start off in Canary Wharf and we had 2 days of intensive training and it was straight to work. On the 3rd day, the Wednesday, I'll tell you exactly how my first phone call went. Good morning, I'm Tay Reid from who? From where? Speak up. I didn't know what to do. At that point, I didn't know my name, I didn't know the firm, I didn't know where the firm was located, I didn't even know how we got their phone number, At that point, I did what any person would do. I stopped, and as a professional, I hung the phone up, So, doing that, this was 11 a.m. From that moment onwards, bearing in mind the day ended at 7:30 at that time, I did no more calls. Not a single email. I spent my time reviewing material, or as otherwise known as reviewing my career choices. And I thought, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. Journey home was silent, no music. And I thought to myself, I don't really think this is for me, right? I see people in the firm making money, but for me, I don't think I don't have the minerals to do this. But then again, I'm faced with a choice. I can not show up tomorrow and pretend that, no one would even know I was gone from the firm. Or I could come in the next day, understand that I'm not going to be, that good to start off with, but do everything that it takes to become the best in the field, or at least the best in the firm. Now, 2 weeks in, I did my first deal. I had my first deal written for £30,000. And from every month from when I started to when I finished, I brought in the most amount of new business to that firm. And I earned the title as New Biz King, which I'm never letting go. Now, what people didn't see was every night I would go home and I would understand everything that there was to know about my firm, about the clients, about the surrounding economy. So there was nothing that I could be questioned with. There was no question that could be asked of me that I didn't know the answer to. And doing that, on the phone, the other person just realised, oh, this guy's a professional, I would trust him with my money. So I was asked by one of the executives at the firm, he said to me, Tay, do you see yourself being in this business long term? And my answer today is the same as it was back then, and that's I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Now you'll see in this business it's very easy to copy, what another firm does, and you can become quite successful in doing that, right? But that's a very fast way to also lead yourself to a quick downfall in most cases. Because I've seen two firms can have the exact same methods but yield two completely different results. And that's because it's not just about the strategy, it's not just about what's written in the textbook, but it's also about execution as well. And that brings me on to the next part. In trying to understand everything there could be, around private equity, everything there was to know around private equity, remember my mission at the time was, understanding the business of owning a business, the business of running a business. So I picked up the SEMA course at the strategic level. That was modules E3, P3 and F3. So that's strategic management, risk management and financial strategy. Yeah, I thought for myself it had the best description of macro enterprise strategy that there was, and there couldn't have been a better knowledge base for me. But at the same time, it creates a very disciplined management strategy. It's very structured. I can understand as a business why you would solicit the advice of a management accountant and want the structured answer. It's based on pure logic, right? It's based on evidence. It's based on past companies, right? But we also include a modern and formless approach, right? We need to understand how we operate in today's market because companies are changing at a rapid pace. We live in a new market where the books haven't even been made yet, right? The technology is developing faster than the companies can even print or can write or print the books. And so we have to stay on our toes. And that's why the modern formless approach is so important. If people wrote case studies on technologies today, they would be entirely baseless because there isn't enough evidence. I mean, you can use logic, you can use past logic, but they're entirely baseless because there isn't enough evidence. And we've seen, for example, OpenAI's ChatGPT come out and change an entire industry in the space of 6 weeks, right? So that brings me on to introducing the firm. The Levyne Group, we invest in the future of I didn't practice this part, I should know this. We invest in the future of great companies and people to solidify legacies, to fuel growth and to strengthen innovation. So, a few key findings for myself. Companies can run through a gigantic change that would generally be seen across 7 to 10 years in 2 to 5. And I'm going to credit that towards technology because you can look at the drastic change that's been made over the past 150 years to see exactly why that is. We've seen us move from the domestic system to the factory system. We've seen changes in international financing. We've seen the Wright brothers develop the first successful flying aircraft. And now 120 years later, we're seeing Lockheed Martin's F-35, a technological marvel, right? So all that change was made over the last 150 years. And then to go a deeper level than that, we have to look at Moore's Law. Now, can anyone in this room tell me what Moore's Law is? That's okay, don't worry about it. It's quite specific information anyway. But Moore's Law suggests the number of transistors in an integrated circuit doubles every 2 years, but also reduces in price, which means the device's speed and cleverness increases over 2 years, but also becomes cheaper. So if you can imagine the opportunities created by this, New companies are being born out of the woodworks because the barrier to entry is lower. A guy in his bedroom can quite literally change the world, and companies are experiencing faster growth because of access to new tools. Right? There's new software as a service tools. There's the rise of social media marketing. We can quite literally reach 100,000 people with the click of a button. Whereas before, if you go back in history, I'll tell you exactly how social media marketing translated. It was people walking door to door, knocking and telling them, come and see my company. Right? And if you want to look more into the modern world, you can say that we used to use the yellow pages to do as such. Now, why we're interested in technology is because of the value that we can bring to key stakeholders. Stakeholders across all touch points, investors, portfolio companies, teams and customers. Right? We use it to make our operation better because we can do things, we can increase our productivity, we can do things faster, we can do things at a lower cost, and we genuinely understand how to build it and how to use it so that we get the most out of it. Now, as a firm, we're sector agnostic. I'll look at anything. But there are a few key things that I'll go into later that are prerequisites for our business. But at the core, we're value investors. So we not only invest capital, but we also take on a strategic management role as well. We like to focus our energy on distressed/turnaround companies or those that are growing, mainly because I feel like the resources that we have are heavily aligned with both situations. Obviously, I know there's a gigantic spectrum of companies to look at, within these spaces, but it's mainly about seeing the parameters that we have, seeing what we can work with, and then applying our capital and strategy towards that. So, let's talk about what we excel in. Firstly, opening new distribution channels, building, managing, and leveraging great relationships for enterprise advantage, of course. But we're experienced in practice. It's not something that we've read out of a textbook or gone on YouTube to do a course in. It's something that we've had our finger on the pulse, we've made the calls, we've sent the emails, we've done the meetings, we understand this stuff. Deals are decided by people and deals dictate revenue. So why wouldn't this be an edge? The second thing, integrating with existing infrastructure, right? Whether a company's founder or board run, I feel the only way to develop a true understanding of a company is to be inside it, right? You can only read a certain amount from a pitch deck or an investment memorandum, right? In order to truly understand the internal mechanics of a company, you need to see how their people think, how they talk to each other, how they make decisions. And that's what comes from having this open communication with a board or a founder, that is. In terms of technology, there's a balance of it. I love technology. I could look at all of the best technologies and marvel in how they are created. But at the end of the day, if you bolster 100 different technologies to a company, you can't just expect it to work because there are repercussions. It costs a lot. It's hard to manage. It can be confusing if you have, if you're constantly onboarding new people, if you have a high turnover rate, right? You're having to train new people on this technology, and the more complex it is, sometimes the better it is, but also the harder it is to assimilate. So you also have to, understand the right balance of it. But having too little of it can also be a problem because you allow people that are versed into it, versed in technology, and do understand it to, overpower your business. So we look at it from two angles: developing our own proprietary technologies and how we can use that to bring value, but also we create a strategic framework for companies so that we do find the optimal balance. Now, in terms of our strategy, companies use investment capital to buy more important things, right? It's not just, go out and buy a Ferrari. We buy other resources, we buy access, we buy supply, and we buy runway, right? That's why we're fluid in our investment approach, because we can be all capital, we can be all strategic, but most likely we'll be a mixture of both. So there's three pillars. I don't know, there's something about three. But there's three pillars that we stick to in our company to make sure that, our investment approach is consistent with how we think and what we believe. The first is having an intrinsic value or underlying value for protection for the company. So this can come in the form of IP that could be sold in the event of a worst case scenario. If a business isn't doing well, there's something to fall back on. It could be a physical asset in terms of material that could be melted down and sold. It could be a building, but that's core for us. Now, if you imagine investing, for every pound you invest in a company, if 80p is protected, only 20p per pound is ever at risk, right? Which is good. But if for every pound you invest, a pound is protected, for me, that's good valuation. And in a distressed company, if for every pound that's invested, the underlying asset value is more, because you're in there to turn the company around, to me, that's called what it takes. The second part, clear and profitable business model. It's unbelievable the fact that I have to even, point this out, because the amount of times I've walked into an establishment and I've thought to myself, there's no way that this company makes money. They hold too much staff, they hold too much, they have too many expenses. There's, cheaper things out there that do exactly the same thing, if not better. There's regulatory changes. I mean, within 2 years' time, the company's dead. And you see it, right? We've almost developed a sixth sense. I feel like Spider-Man, right? But at the same time, in this industry, I've seen an incredible amount of overvaluation, right? I've seen some egregiously valued companies that, in my opinion, will never turn a profit because the fundamentals are wrong, right? And the graveyard, for me, that's an interesting concept, because down that hall of fame of rock star investments that went to the moon, they made it, they're unicorns now, they're valued over £1 billion, they were meant to make it, right? If you look just out the window, you see a graveyard about 1,000 times the size of other rock star investments that look like they would be home runs, they're going to the moon, right? To the investors. But at the core, if you look to the business's fundamentals, it was never going to make it, right? But they still got the capital regardless. The third thing is our strategic value add. If you look at our team culture and our capabilities, right? This is something, we understand what we have and we only work with what we have. Like, for example, the videos that you saw from Ewan today, absolutely incredible. I consider us a strike team, right? Because we have the ability, if we're looking at a new company, we know what we have, we know what value we can add, and so we use that to bring some form of relevant intelligence to the business to be able to actually be able to affect real change. And it also gives our investors some confidence, and it gives the companies that we work with some confidence, because we're a walking, talking version of our ideology. Now I'm going to give you 3 future investment areas that I'm particularly excited about. It's not the full playbook, so don't worry, there's no ulterior motive. The first one is obviously the love child of the technology industry, that's artificial intelligence. I've seen firsthand what Knight and Bond have been able to create, and for me, it's incredibly exciting. But as we know, it's quite popular. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors around, what it will do, how people will use it, and who's actually, an expert in this, as is any, transformative technology. But I feel like once that clears, what you'll be left with is some of the most important technologies created by some of the smartest people that our world has to offer. Right? There is a trade-off though. Everyone's looking at the uncertainty versus the opportunity of it. We've been looking at, is it going to overpower us? Is it going to be something that we have to bow down to in the morning? And for me, it's advanced pattern recognition, that's all it is, of course. And there is a possibility that there could be, bad consequences of having it. But I feel like there'll be far more opportunities created by the augmentation of the human, being able to build and develop these systems, being able to integrate them into our current businesses and improve our productivity. The second one is quantum computing. I don't feel like a lot of people understand, what it truly means or, how it's done. And I'm not going to go into it because it's quite a long, lengthy conversation and you guys have heard me talk enough. But in order to make it commercially viable, there needs to be a lot of hardware development that goes into actually, creating this technology. In terms of opportunities as well, We know the threat that it poses to RSA encryption, which is what we currently use for messaging and banking transactions and things of that sort. But I also think the opportunity created will eventually be quantum encryption, by which we would have already had it commercially viable, and so we would have developed the material science relevant for it, and that's going to spill over into naval exploration, it's going to spill over into space exploration, and it's going to crack the lid open on drug discovery also. And the third thing is hardware technology. Are there any investors in the room? It's all right, I already know who's an investor in the room. So it's heavily overlooked in venture capital, mainly because the advantage does sit with big corporations with sizable R&D budgets, operational intelligence, understanding of the supply chain and an existing supply chain also. We know it's capital intensive, but we also know that it incurs a lot of risk because you have to buy physical things, and sometimes, you know, it does get thrown away 90% of the time. The barrier to entry is high for the person sitting in their bedroom creating new technologies, so it does lack disruption, because I feel like that's where it comes from. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out, and genuinely, thank you.
Yeah, okay. Go on.